The alpha they called Omega. Chapter 1. The Glass and Steel Heir. Cale Ashford had spent his entire life being admired, a fate he found both utterly exhausting and entirely necessary. Born into one of the wealthiest, most formidable alpha dynasties in the high-walled metropolis of New Horizon, Cale had been meticulously raised for inheritance, leadership, and absolute perfection. From the moment he could walk, every movement was measured. Every expression was ruthlessly monitored and controlled by tutors, handlers, and the heavy, unyielding expectations of his father, Alistair Ashford. Cale had learned early that vulnerability was a terminal diagnosis in their world. Consequently, he carried himself like a man carved from glass and steel, beautiful enough to be deeply desired by high society, yet untouchable and cold enough to be universally feared. People watched Cale the way they watched impending disasters from a safe, fascinated distance, careful, breathless, waiting for the first microscopic cracks to appear in his flawless armor. For 26 years, he never gave them a single one. He ran his family's venture capital firms with a brutal, bloodless efficiency, attended gala events with an air of aristocratic boredom, and maintained a reputation that was entirely unassailable. Until his Omega lover cheated on him. It hadn't been a discreet, quiet affair hidden away in a luxury hotel room. It hadn't been a private lapse in judgment that could be swept under the rug with a few heavy briefcases of hush money. Instead, the betrayal had spread through the glittering tiers of high society with an elegant, calculated cruelty. It was folded into soft, musical laughter behind crystal champagne glasses at charity auctions. It was packaged as dripping, superficial pity disguised as concern during high-stakes board meetings. Poor Cale, the whispers drifted through the velvet-lined ballrooms. An alpha of his stature, undone by a pretty little thing who couldn't keep his eyes, or his scent, to himself. The humiliation became a pristine form of entertainment for people rich enough to pretend that malicious gossip counted as genuine affection. For the first time in his life, Cale found himself leaving prestigious dinners early, the fine wine turning to ash on his tongue, utterly unable to stomach the suffocating, predatory weight of their stares. His pride, the very foundation of his identity, was bleeding out in public view. So, when Lucien Vale appeared at the periphery of his vision during a particularly agonizing charity gala, suggesting with a ghost of a smirk that they'd disappear for one reckless, unmonitored night to forget the scandal, Cale agreed out of sheer, burning spite. Lucien had always unsettled him. They had grown up side by side in neighboring sprawling country estates, their families bound together by generations of dark wealth, political alliances, and blood-iron treaties. Both were believed to be powerful alphas. Both were the sole heirs to empires that dictated the economic pulse of the city. Yet, they could not have been more fundamentally different. Cale was sharp edges hidden beneath an expensive, polished veneer, a winter storm trapped in a tailored suit. Lucien, conversely, was silence wrapped in absolute elegance. He was beautiful in a way that never actively asked for attention, yet somehow effortlessly stole the oxygen from any room he walked into. He was calm to the absolute point of irritation, impossible to read. The kind of person who listened far too carefully and revealed entirely too little of himself. Cale had spent years pretending he disliked Lucien. He told himself that Lucien's quiet arrogance rubbed his dominant alpha instincts the wrong way. The truth, however, was far harder to survive. Buried deep in a place Cale refused to look, he noticed Lucien far too much. He noticed the precise way Lucien's dark hair fell across his brow, the low, resonant timbre of his voice, and the way those piercing grey eyes seemed to look right through Cale's carefully constructed armor. "Let's get out of here," Lucien had murmured, leaning in just close enough for Cale to catch the faint, crisp scent of cedar and rain that always clung to him. "Before your father's associates stare a hole right through your back." Cale had tightened his jaw, his fingers white around his glass. "Where?" "Somewhere they don't care about the Ashford name," Lucien replied softly. "Somewhere raw." The club they chose was supposed to mean absolutely nothing. It was an underground, exclusive establishment nestled deep in the neon-drenched lower districts of the city, a place where the wealthy went when they wanted to degrade themselves in the dark, away from the flashing cameras of the paparazzi. Inside, the music pounded through the reinforced concrete, walls hard enough to rattle bone and set teeth on edge. Crimson and violet strobe lights fractured the darkness, casting long, predatory shadows over the sea of moving bodies pressed together on the dance floor. The air was thick, heavy with the chaotic, competing pheromones of hundreds of unbonded alphas, betas, and omegas. Cale drank heavily. He downed amber liquid that burned his throat, drinking enough to finally blur the sharp, suffocating edges of the humiliation sitting like lead in his chest, but not nearly enough to erase it completely. He wanted to feel numb. He wanted to feel anything other than the burning rage of being the city's most mocked alpha. Through it all, Lucien stayed close, unbearably close. He didn't drink much, nor did he join the throngs of people trying to catch his eye. He simply stood beside Cale at the VIP railing, watching the chaos below, quiet, unnervingly attentive. His presence was a steady, grounding anchor against the wild, chaotic pulse of the club. Then, suddenly, the air shifted. It didn't happen gradually. One moment Lucien was standing tall, looking out over the crowd with his usual detached, aristocratic boredom, and the next, he stumbled violently. Cale caught him instinctively, his arm wrapping around Lucien's waist to keep him upright. A sudden, deep crimson flush spread rapidly beneath Lucien's usually pale, pristine skin. His breathing hitched sharply, a ragged, desperate sound that was entirely uncharacteristic of the poised air. Lucien's fingers clawed blindly at Cale's sleeve, catching against the expensive fabric hard enough to permanently wrinkle it. Cale, Lucien said, his voice dropping an octave, rough and fractured with something dangerously unfamiliar, something primitive. Something's wrong. At first, Cal thought someone had slipped something into his drink. He thought Lucien was ill, perhaps suffering from a sudden cardiac reaction. But then, the scent hit. It didn't drift into the air. It tore through the heavily pressurized room like a burning match thrown directly into a pool of gasoline. It was dark, intoxicatingly sweet, and utterly, thoroughly overwhelming. It was nothing like the light, floral, or fruity scents of a standard omega heat. This was something entirely different. It was heavy, ancient, and thick with a terrifying genetic authority that defied modern biological classification. It commanded attention. It demanded submission. Nearby conversations instantly faltered. The heavy bass of the music seemed to fade into the background as the biological shockwave registered. An older, battle-scarred alpha across the VIP lounge went completely rigid, his glass shattering on the floor as his pupils dilated into thin black slits. Another alpha near the stairs growled softly, turning his head, a dark, unmistakable hunger flashing instantly in his eyes as he took a step toward Lucien. Cale's protective instincts, honed by a lifetime of dominant alpha training, reacted before his conscious mind could even catch up to the horror of the situation. A low, warning rumble tore from his own throat, a sound he didn't even know he was capable of making. He dragged Lucien toward the heavily guarded VIP side exit. One hand locked like a vice around Lucien's trembling wrist, the other pressed firmly, possessively against the small of his back. Lucien was burning hot now, radiating a feverish heat that bled right through his layers of clothing. He was trembling violently, his knees buckling, leaning helplessly into every single point of contact Cale offered. "What did you take, Lucien?" Cale demanded savagely as they slammed through the heavy exit doors, hitting the biting, freezing air of the private back alley. "What the hell did you ingest in there?" "Nothing," Lucien whispered, his head rolling back against Cale's shoulder, his usually piercing grey eyes completely unfocused, glazed over with a dark, terrifying gloss. "I swear. Cale, I didn't take anything. It's happening." Neither of them understood what was happening to their biology in that frozen alleyway. Cale only knew that the intoxicating, ancient scent pouring from Lucien's every pore was getting directly under his skin, filling his lungs, poisoning his blood with a desperate, frantic need. By the time they managed to stumble into the back of a private, automated transport and arrived at the secluded penthouse owned exclusively by Cale's family, Cale's own tightly wound, lifelong control had already begun to completely fracture. Lucien barely made it 3 steps inside the door before collapsing heavily against the marble wall of the foyer, his breath coming in uneven, ragged gasps that echoed in the silent apartment. Cale tried to look away, tried to call a medical team, tried to do anything that a rational, civilized alpha should do. He failed immediately. Lucien's usually perfect, untouchable composure had shattered into dust. His expensive silk shirt was partially unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the frantic pulse beating in his throat. His cheeks were deeply flushed, his pupils blown so wide they completely swallowed the grey of his irises, and his lips were parted with shallow, trembling breaths that sounded almost agonizingly painful. That whispered name was what ultimately destroyed him. Lucien never sounded needy. Lucien never sounded uncertain or fragile. And somehow, the visual and auditory reality of this powerful, elegant man completely unraveling before him destroyed what little restraint Cale had spent his entire life building. When Lucien's fingers tangled desperately into the front of Cale's shirt, pulling him down, something fundamental inside Cale's mind snapped. The kiss was not gentle. It was not a tentative exploration of hidden feelings. It was a desperate, violent collision. All the buried tension they had actively ignored for over a decade surfaced at once. Years of competitive anger, secret fascination, and an intense, mutual attraction that had been sharpened into something unbearable by forced proximity and raw, unadulterated instinct. Lucien made a broken, whimpering sound against Cale's mouth, but instead of pushing him away, he pulled Cale closer, his arms wrapping around Cale's neck with a surprising, terrifying strength. After that first collision of lips, reality dissolved completely. Time stopped existing in a linear fashion. There was no past, no future, no high society scandal, and no family legacies to uphold. There was only the suffocating heat of the penthouse, the primal rush of instinct, and the dizzying, terrifying shock of discovering how perfectly, how seamlessly their bodies fit together. The world beyond the reinforced glass of the penthouse disappeared entirely. For 10 straight days.